welcome to Plus One to Gaming. I'm Chris.
And I'm Eric.
And I'm Mark.
And today we're going to talk about how to steal stuff for your D&D game. Now, Eric, I know this is something that you're excited to talk about.
Yeah.
Mark, I think you've done this as well. I know I do this in my daily work. Taking inspiration from the world around us, media, music, TV, comics, whatever. And if you're an artist, you've taken inspiration from that at some point and used it, shaped it, changed it, for your purpose and make something new. And when we're talking about D&D games, tabletop games, fantasy games, we're constantly pulling in stuff to, enhance our games, to make it, try to make it the world we want to create. And borrowing stuff from the, properties that we love is a great way to do that. So Eric, do you want to talk a little bit about what you look for when you're taking inspiration and how you kind of borrow without like directly stealing? Because I feel like stealing is a negative.
I mean, I straight steal.
Okay.
But yes. So a lot of, I think of like, I do this so often. I'm trying to consolidate into like a train of thought and not just name 100 things that I've stolen.
Yeah.
I guess anytime I'm watching, listening, thinking about something, I'm like, this is an interesting plot line. This could be a D&D campaign. Like that's like pretty much like a little earlier we talked about Our Flag Means Death, the Taika Waititi show. That is phenomenal. And several times in there, I'm like, I would play this campaign. Like that a lot of times is what draws me in. Like this would be fun for me to be in there, which is the goal of like any sort of filmmaking, songwriting, like what it is to pull your like emotions in. You want to be part of this experience. And with tabletop games like D&D, we get to do that. So, I mean, there are countless things that like, I'm trying to think if there's any that I've actually stolen and there is.
Ooh.
And we played.
Yes. Good.
So I'm gonna out myself. When we played the High Strangeness game,
and that was Monster of the Week rule set.
Yeah, Monster of the Week. We never recorded this. If this was 4 years ago, 3 years, it was a long time ago.
It's way pre-pandemic.
The premise was it's like set in the like 68 or something in like a small town in Pittsburgh or in Pennsylvania. And the Mothman is attacking and the three of you have to like band together and defeat it.
We did defeat it, spoiler alert.
You did defeat it, but barely. He almost kicked your asses. I stole like crazy for this. Obviously, like kind of first of all from the Mothman movie with Richard Gere, which I don't remember the name of.
I think maybe it was just Mothman.
Mothman? Yeah.
The Mothman?
Mothman
Prophecies.
Yes. So I remembered that movie, and like that movie did have an effect on me. And it came out in like 98 or something.
We were in high school.
Yeah. And I was like, damn, this is creepy as hell. Enough that like my ex-girlfriend and I drove to like Hilton Head and drove through the town that happened in. And on the way back, we like stopped because we loved that movie so much. So I stole like little things from that. Like Mark, in the beginning of that, you had lost time. Like actually the beginning of the movie is Mark's beginning of his character. Like that happened in the movie.
Mm-hmm.
I can usually, when I steal things like this, either trust that no one's going to remember this, no one has seen this, or I can change it enough that I hope at least it's hidden and you're not like, oh, this is the Mothman prophecy with Richard Gere. So I stole stuff from that. I stole stuff from, this is going to get like layers. What actually like was the genesis of the idea for that campaign was a Last Podcast on the Left podcast about the Men in Black.
Oh, okay. So we're pulling from Richard Gere. We're pulling
Mothman Prophecies, a podcast. Yeah. So when did that movie come out?
And that's like original Men in Black that also loosely inspired Will Smith Men in Black, which is government agents, but not necessarily cool like Will Smith. They were more like creepy spirit people away who knew things in the night types, right? Mm-hmm. Like more nefarious.
Yeah.
In that context.
I'm trying to think of which one it was. I think it was the Men in Black episode, but yes, it's like, so in this, in the episode for the last podcast on the left, they basically go through like a story of like what was happening in a small town that was like being visited by extraterrestrials. And there's just like, that's actually where I got the name High Strangeness from also, because one of the hosts of that show says it like 15 times.
That'd be a good name for a campaign.
Yeah. So in that, like, there's aliens, there's the Men in Black, and then there's actually like aliens pretending to be Men in Black. So there's just like an extra level of weirdness that I was like, this is like so much texture and flavor, and like it's a really confusing lived in world. That's going to be like, that's interesting to me.
And I will say, like, as a player, it was fun and also confusing and a challenge to figure out like what all of this weird stuff, like, where's it coming from? What, like, it was really cool to have these different elements to try and sift through.
And there are like threads that you guys didn't pull on that would have led you down. Like, you could have figured out that there are basically two Men in Blacks. There's the government one, and then the aliens that are just being weird, and we don't really know what their motives are. So I pulled a lot, and that wasn't really plot. It was just like things. I really know the like characters. Like, I think the reporter character. So there are two reporter characters. John, what was his name?
Alder Cold, something like that.
Eldridge. Oh, what was his?
There's one guy. He was like there was an author guy that would follow us around.
Yeah, so he is a real person, and they talk about him. I can't remember his name right now. He maybe wrote the actual book.
I think that's what it was. And then you brought him in as an NPC.
Yeah. So they talked about him in the podcast. And then there was the lady that wrote for the newspaper.
Oh, yeah.
She's based on a real person also. They talked about her. And so, like, I pulled these interesting characters from it. I pulled kind of the premise from it and some, like, flavor. And then I pulled the plot from something different.
Can we take one small step back, though?
Yeah.
Of, like, first of all, like, why are you doing this? Why are you looking to these different avenues and areas and trying to pull stuff?
So I don't go looking for it. Again, like I was listening, the last podcast on the left episode was the genesis of it. I was listening to that, and I thought this would be such a fun, like, place and mystery to play in. It was a game I wanted to play.
So you're just like keeping your feelers out.
Yeah. I mean, like,
spider sense tingles.
Again, anytime again, our flag means death. I'm like, this would be fun to play. Mm-hmm. There's a ton of stuff like that it intrigues me enough that, like, if it's a game I want to play, then okay, what would this look like? These characters, I want you guys to interact with these real characters. So I'll pull them from it, maybe twist some things, whatever. So I've got the premise.
More like a lack of inspiration when you're interacting with some other thing.
And then, so that one, I kind of did go looking for a plot, but I didn't like search like plots for Mothman, like it wasn't that deliberate.
Do you remember where you pulled that thread from?
I believe so, but I might be incorrect. So there's another podcast I was listening to at the time that was a like Marvel storytelling podcast about Wolverine, and I was like, this plot's fine. Like, it wasn't great, but it was easy enough to like beat out like this happens, then this happens, and this happens kind of thing. Spoiler alert, I'm thinking about doing it again because I'm listening to another one of those, and I'm like, again, this plot's fine, but I can fill it in and make it better with the things that like either I come up with or I pull from something else.
It's also, you know, you have to prioritize. I feel like there's a lot of pressure to get everything right, whatever that means to you. And if that means unique, you're in for trouble.
Oh, yeah.
Because that's a lot of pressure that's unnecessary, I think, because you can do something like, you know, if you're doing that game, then in that example, the characters are what we're interested in. So a couple plot points being pulled directly from something else is like no one even cares or will notice.
Yeah.
Also, I think it's interesting because that entire game that we played, I was like for sure that you were about to mention X-Files, because the entire time we played it, I was pulling references or feeling references and callbacks from, like, in particular, Jose Jones from Outer Space, which is an episode of X-Files where they run into Men in Black and they act insane. They like gaslight everybody. It's just weirdness all around. And like, I don't even know if they say the phrase high strangeness in there, because that was like kind of I think that was like a industry term in like conspiracy theory circles, but like that described that perfectly too. And like, if you weren't even referencing that, I feel like that's just kind of proof that you need to give yourself a little space with things. And like, there's always a reference to anything. Like, you know, you can't create something wholly new. Sorry, Elon Musk, keep trying, bud. But it's like, there's a difference between stealing some ideas and just the fact that like tropes exist and they are useful. And there's a reason that certain things like hero's journey stories pop up all the time, because when used well and in a good situation for a purpose, it makes that enjoyable to people. Like, that's why we have genre. I know that I like fantasy, so I can grab one of those and have some framework and expectation. So I just think it's really interesting, like, because sometimes I'm like, oh yeah, this is 100% Eric's like totally riffing on Mulder and Scully. I'm like leaning into that on my end, and then like 5 years later, you're like, yeah, it's a bunch of these things you've never actually seen, and like, and I'm like, oh cool, well, like that's how.
And I've never seen an episode of the X-Files, so it was perfect. Like, not, I'm aware of it obviously, and I know like, but. Yeah, I mean, the thing is, like, the X-Files was probably, they're all influenced on the same stuff. Like, the X-Files probably pulled from the same thing that the last podcast, like, they probably read the same book about Men in Black or whatever.
They all watched The Simpsons.
And all of it, all of it eventually goes back to reality. So, like, you know what I mean? All of that, even if the reality was really someone just near Area 51 seeing something that was normal and misinterpreting it, all of that culture has built off of that. So, like, when people get too worried about stealing, it's like, you can't, there's a difference, you know? It's like you're being inspired by everything, and you can't just be, you know, making something wholly new all the time, 24/7, especially for something like fun, like D&D.
And the thing with D&D is like, I just don't feel like I need to. Like, I'm not writing a novel. I'm not making, I'm not making a movie to try to sell it. Like, I'm not trying to reskin Seven Samurai as a Western, and I'm not going to get sued for stealing Kurosawa's like shots shot for shot. Like, if I can get, so here's my like basis idea. Like, if I can get interesting characters, an interesting premise, and an outline of a plot, that's kind of all I need for D&D. Because you guys are going to zig when I wanted you to zag, and we're going to go off the rails session 1. Like, I have a couple characters that I can guide you with. We basically only had 3 other named characters.
You don't need that many.
We don't need that many. John Keel who's the author. I looked him up.
That's right.
He's the one that kind of gets you together and sends you out. And then he left. He's like, I got stuff to do. Because I didn't want you guys leaning on him too much.
Yeah. And that was a really awesome tactic of being able to like use him as the hook, and then he's got reasons to be elsewhere.
I have a second campaign, or I guess adventure, for these people, and it's like he's in and out of your life, and he's doing other stuff, and I thought it was interesting because like I wanted to pull it into like actual real world, like what was he doing this year? Like, oh, he's in Russia. Okay, you guys get a letter from Russia. You whatever. The reporter lady kind of sent you on some threads, so she was basically like another like quest giver. And then the cop, and I think the cop is kind of pulled from the movie. I don't really remember. But because I think at the end of the movie, like a bridge collapses. It's been
There is a bridge collapse. Yeah,
I remember that bridge
collapse. I don't remember if we did that. Did we do that in the game? Because it was all kind of culminating toward something, and I think you guys stopped it.
Yes, we did. Stop.
So if you didn't stop it, he was going to die. He was going to die on that bridge.
Crisis averted.
Crisis averted. So, like, I had the plot lined out, but we changed the plot every dice roll. Every choice you make changes it. So I don't feel too bad like stealing beats of like this happens and this happens, because this happens and then the next thing doesn't happen. We go off, and I have things that are like ticking clocks that are like gonna happen later, but you averted it, so it didn't happen.
Yeah, and that's okay. Like when you're the DM running these campaigns, it's good to have multiple scenarios, options, because to your point, and we've said this dozens of times over the past year and a half we've done this freaking podcast, the party is always gonna zag.
Yep.
Always gonna do something. The more you try and map out every single detail that they're going to do, the more you're going to waste your time and be disappointed. So I think to your earlier point, Eric, looking for other places for inspiration is just a really good shortcut. It's going to give you the ability to do that heavy lifting a lot more quickly and get stuff spun up. And if it's not used, no big deal. Like you didn't spend hours and hours writing, all this stuff. It's okay. Or save it for later.
Which is a way worse feeling than people being like, oh, cool, I recognize that from Kurosawa.
Yeah, that's the worst thing you want to have
honestly,
happen.
You know what I mean? And which is another thing, like reskinning and all the different ways, which we have like a whole different episode just pretty much on reskinning, which is just, basically taking things that already exist and changing proper nouns and like physical descriptions, maybe at most. You don't have to get much more complicated than that. A, highly effective. B, if you're worried about seeming, like you're just stealing, it covers things up, like, little
covers your tracks enough.
Tracelessness there. And I had a third point as well that I'm forgetting now, because I was trying to remember what Dust of Tracelessness was called. I always try to stick a joke in there, and then I forget what I was talking about.
It'll come back to you when you least expect it.
Probably will.
But I mean, so I try to write. I write a lot, or at least write outlines a lot. Writing's hard.
Writing is hard.
Like I would like to dabble. I dabble in, I guess, screenwriting. But like once you get to like fade in and start writing the script, that part is crazy hard. But for me, like outlines are pretty easy. Like I can think of characters. I can think of, oh, it'd be cool if this happens. Da, 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 da. But like as a person who is not like a professional screenwriter, I will look up like Gladiator beat for beat and steal that shit. like I'm writing a screenplay about a luchador who is like towards the end of his career and like a professional wrestler, and the owner of the league is going to give him the league, but his son finds out, so the son and it's Gladiator. It's the fucking plot of Gladiator.
Just in luchador.
told in a different, like, so then the luchador gets like has to go back to Mexico and like find his roots and then comes back and wins. Like, I don't need to think of like a like unique plot, because I'm still working on all the rest of the stuff.
Yeah.
Like, I need to write dialogue. I'm not going to steal dialogue word for word. I need to work on characters. Like, if I can take some of the heavy lifting away and just be like, here's what happens in this story, that's fine. And then later, maybe I think of something like, oh, actually, this is way better. Let me change it.
Yeah. That's the other thing, is writing anything is a process that is sequential. Like, just because you had one thought and later you look back and you're like, this is derivative, doesn't mean you're like, well, shoot, I wrote it down, so now my whole thing sucks. But other thing is, like, different people end up in similar situations all the time.
Exactly.
You know,
and you're not
just
saying,
because
well,
they're in different millennia and different
copying.
professions. And I remember what I was going to say before, which actually segues back now, is because, like, if you do that well, someone might actually see that and be like, this movie about this luchador, I can never say that, is an homage to things such as Gladiator. You know what I mean? Like, you see movie reviews and or like you see stuff on like even TikTok. People are like, look at this shot by shot referential stuff people are doing. And then a lot of people are like, that's so amazing. I love it so much more.
Yeah.
I see where the inspiration came from. Like, there's actually value there.
Yeah,
there definitely is.
In taking and acknowledging that you aren't just trying to do the same thing and pretend like it's never happened before. There's a lot of value in, like, in everything, even comedy. Like, callback is the number one thing that people laugh at and think is funny in any sort of, like, watch a drama and they're going to use one callback to help soften a really hard moment. Because it hits so well, and nobody's ever like, ugh, everyone does callbacks.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not going to try that. Like, you know,
it's exactly like you said. Like, if you think you're going to like reinvent the wheel, like, you're not Shakespeare. Like, you're not going to, like,
don't hurt yourself like that.
So I don't know, because I read on Reddit, like, people will write, like, and I'm like, props to them, but people will write like, this is my campaign, and it's like a novel.
Not reading.
I'm not reading. So, like, first of all, I'm not reading that. Second of all, your players, these are the like horror stories, I feel like, when they're like, my players played my game wrong. Like, well, you wrote a book.
You DM'd wrong.
Yes. So, like, for me as a DM, I got a full-time job. I do a bunch of other stuff. I don't have time to write a full book. Obviously, I can't even write a damn screenplay about a luchador. I want to find easy ways to make things fun for us. So when I am just out in the world listening to stuff, watching things, and I think, I want to play this game. What about this makes me interested? Is it this character, and the premise? Cool. I can fill in the plot later. Is it the plot, but I don't really like the characters? I can find other, like, you can mix and match and change, like, again, the luchador thing, like, you can change the time period, the genre, the whatever, to hide all of these mistakes. Like, we could play like the Spider-Man movie, but in medieval times, and like, you'd miss it because there's no Spider-Man. If they are, they're like a Drider or whatever. Like, you miss it. It like, reskinning and stealing that's my bread and butter, apparently.
You said
I didn't realize until you posed this conversation. I was like, oh yeah, I do this all the time.
You posed I think a critical, like, perspective. What about this attracts you? And I think if you can get better at your ability of honing in on that, it's going to be a lot easier to pull that inspiration. And I also just want to reiterate that this process is okay. There's times where it's not, and that's like literal plagiarism, where you're just taking something one for one and copying it over and saying it's yours.
Yeah.
Obviously
so
not
again,
okay.
Like, if we were selling a campaign and it was just the Gladiator screenplay, like, not cool.
Yeah.
But like, you're playing games with your friends. Who cares? Like, Paramount's not going to come and do a cease and assist on your table.
Yeah. And, you know, like, on the player end, or I'm sure there are, you know, you hear horror stories and stuff, but like, is your table full of people who are like, Spider-Man, Star Wars, Klingons. Like, I see what you're doing. I'll get you figure out.
I'm gonna call you out.
Yeah, like, I mean, again, I think if I noticed like this X-Files thing in my head, I was just like, sweet, one of my favorite shows.
Right?
Like,
sign up for
I'm
the
not gonna
ride.
make
Like,
you stop entertaining me.
because that's the point. And again, like with that specifically, it was like, I want to play in this world because I think it's fun and interesting, and I think you guys will think it's fun and interesting.
Yeah, and really, I mean, a lot of like wanting to reskin on my part is like that same sensation when you used to leave a movie as a kid, where you're like, let me go to the toy store because I want to buy that new Batman mask and put it on right now and go run around in the woods because I feel inspired. And just because I'm inspired to interact further with something isn't like a bad thing.
No.
Yeah.
That's where, like, you know, fan fiction and stuff, people just sit down and play in a world that they enjoy.
Yeah.
And
Which
they didn't have to be a good idea if you're the type of DM who just wants to write a novel but doesn't feel comfortable writing a novel. Just write your fucking novel, bro.
Yeah.
Do it.
Get over it.
And tell people it's a novel. Because if you tell them if it's a novel, they'll be like, cool, I'll read a novel.
Yeah.
I want to read your novel.
I don't want to
just
play
not
your
while
novel.
I'm trying to play D&D.
Yeah.
Because these are two different things.
But it is, so it's interesting.
Fan fiction about your own world and party that's not referential to anything that's maybe has to happen if you want, you know, and that's when you can do the crazy NPC backstories and still get that urge to go into detail and like really hash things out. But like, you don't have to always do that just with plot. That seems like the most important part because you know that's what's going to drive stuff in a large area of the campaign. But like, you can go crazy, go ham on some other details like physical descriptions of places, still have the fun that you want from writing stuff out and knocking out all these ideas and incorporating crazy stuff, but also, again, making it a bit easier on yourself. And if you don't care about locations, then it's Cinderella's castle, because that's the one I can describe. I can look at a picture of it and just type down, there's 5 pillars and whatever.
Yeah.
It makes it so you can actually use the stuff you're creating too, like taking that route. The other thing I wanted to circle back to just a little bit, when you're looking at these really good examples of strong screenplays or any inspiration, studying from the masters and stealing from the masters is the best way to grow. You look at that, you break down what makes it effective, you take those pieces, you start playing with them, learning about them, and that makes you grow or helps you grow as a storyteller.
Yeah. I mean, so Chris, you said something earlier, like being able to recognize like why you're interested or like what excites you about something. Like, it is these types of like exercises that make you a better writer. Like, maybe, 10 campaigns in, you can create something whole cloth because you're so steeped in how stories work, how characters work. But that's like, there are professional writers, we've talked about it several times in this podcast, that can't do that. Like, the Book of Boba Fett did not do that.
Did not do anything.
Didn't do anything.
I don't even think that was their goal.
I don't either.
Sell more character.
And I like it, just for the record.
But
love the show. I don't think that's what they were going for.
But to like hold yourself to like those standards and say like, I need to create this. It's got to be a brand new world with a brand new magic system, and like,
it's easy to fall into when you're new.
It is, and I think you're setting yourself up for failure.
I know, I've been there.
I've been necessary, honestly. When you start out, I feel like it's, I don't know, it's some pool, like everyone steps on this trap.
Yep. Yeah, you want to create your own new, like, well, I don't actually think 5e is the proper game for my story, so I'll just make up a whole new rule set. Like, people will fall into several traps. And I mean, I kind of play these mental games. Like, if you're just at work or at home or whatever, and you're thinking of like, fine, entertain your mind. It's fun to think about stuff like that. But like, if your goal is to like, I want to put a group together and actually play this game, I don't think that's the way to do it.
You're going to spend so much time doing all that pre-work. And when things start out and they don't go how you planned, you are going to be frustrated. I can fucking tee it because we've all been there.
Yeah.
But
I mean,
also,
again,
I guess I just want to like cap that with, if you do that, give yourself some grace and be gentle. Just accept that you did that, learn your lesson, and move on.
Learn the lesson is the important thing, because again, we've all done that.
Yeah.
And if you're sitting here being like, I'm still going to do it anyways, even though I continue to read on Reddit and these jokels are telling me right now that I shouldn't, because you probably will. You're going to homebrew some new mechanic on your first campaign, and also just like borrow stuff. Take that inspiration where you can get it, and if you feel inspired to do something that's too detailed in one area, borrow something, reskin something somewhere else, so you don't spend 37 hours prepping your one shot that you play for 5.
Yeah. Or 37 hours prepping a storyline no one goes down, or 37 hours prepping a homebrew mechanic that your D&D or your DM says no to. Like,
sure.
Again, because like I'm not huge on homebrewing because I don't got the time. But I'll look through if I have something that I want to be special, I'll look for something that basically achieves that goal and change the proper nouns. Like, it's just, oh, now this is a that. Boom. Yeah. And Billy can't say no, because I'm like, it's just this. This is fine.
I think at a certain point, we have to get over I guess it's just like a mental thing of wanting to be the person to create something new and unique. And especially where we are with modern society, like pretty much everything that's been done has been done. It's going to be very difficult for you to create something new, especially if you're a new player who's understanding new rule sets, new, ways of interacting with your players, like doing all this stuff. There's a lot to managing these games, and there's even more when you're trying to create your own world or game or system. So I think just like having some pragmatism of what you're capable of and what's already there, and just like being okay with not creating something new whole cloth. Like, even just bringing your creative perspective and making changes, tweaks, adjusting it to fit your unique style and your table's unique style. That's more than enough. And you're going to get more of a benefit, like personally, and from your players doing that than spending those 37 hours on could amount to nothing.
Yeah.
It's also good to remember that you should learn the shape of the hull before you rock the boat.
Oh yeah.
Lest ye sink yourself.
Yeah.
There's just having a general knowledge of how things will go and some experience under your belt before you start tinkering will help you isolate whether the problem is you or something else. Like, the mechanic might not actually need addressing. It might just be hard to remember all the steps of it, or, so give yourself a chance to figure out so that you don't end up blaming yourself for a bunch of stuff that's just like the zigzag conundrum and, little things that happen to everybody. But when you try to do a wholesale, I'm going to do this all on my own, you're going to end up feeling like every little hiccup is because of you or your plot that you made up or whatever. So like, just, And
that's not fun to sit with either as a DM.
No. And then you feel like everybody's going to bail, or like, then you lose inspiration. So you started really deep and detailed, and then now you're vague. Like, that's a tough transition to make too.
Yeah. I don't know. So like, one of my philosophies with a lot of stuff that I do is understanding that I am not good at this because I've not been doing it like as long as the masters. So with guitar specifically, like, I will try to play a song that I really enjoy, and I will get maybe a fourth of it, like fourth of the notes, a fourth of the speed. And I'm like, you know what though? This sounds pretty good. And I wrote this because this isn't what they did.
And you're having fun.
And I'm having fun. So like, I have a bunch of riffs that are like maybe literally derivative of other riffs,
Coon's
but
Jam
they're
is good.
different enough because I can't play the real riff. I'm not good enough. but I'm good enough for this one, and that's good enough for me.
Yeah.
And like it's a weird philosophy that I have with because it is like I am not a competitive person. So it's the opposite of like I need to be the best. I'm like, I'm good where I am.
Good enough though is there's a freelancer that I follow named Paul Jarvis, and completely different world, creative professional. But his premise is like enough. This concept of having like enough. Like you don't have to always push.
Yeah.
Like there can be a place where like I'm good here, and maybe it's just like worrying about maintaining that, and that's fine.
Well, they say what's the phrase, like perfect is the enemy of good.
Yeah.
And you're never gonna get perfect.
I do want to do a separate topic of just the concept of zigzagging, like
we can do that
as a DM and as a player, just that concept and phenomenon, because I think prepping
It needs a name.
but whatever it's called, from a DM's perspective, knowing how to manage that, and then as a player,
managing the zag.
Yeah, because sometimes it's like, well, I guess it's like I don't want to get into it right now.
Yeah.
So
so for
notes.
as a like content creator, like somebody who is like actually in the real sense of the term, I guess, like I'm creating content, like I'm creating a D&D or hero. What was the hero of the week, monster of the week, adventure? I'm creating this content. Like I am scrutinized, and rightfully so. Like, because again, like Mark said, there you might have people on your table like, this is Star Trek, that's Star Wars, this is Lord of the Rings. Like, I get what you're doing. First of all, if you're that person, sit back and have fun.
Yeah,
like,
cut it out
and let people have fun.
Chill.
I feel bad because I am that person in film. I'm like, oh, they're doing this, like, and I have like made my wife a more critical film watcher. And it's like when I don't have kids, but I feel like it's like when a parent, like when the kid stops believing in the tooth fairy, you're like, you lose a little wonder at like, I am like, oh damn, I did that to her.
I will say that you did that to me as well.
Yeah.
Because you were into film before I was and got me into it. And now I'm more critical because of it. God damn you.
So that is the pot calling the kettle, whatever, because like I feel like don't be critical, and then I'm critical, but that's not the point of this medium. But as a player also, I steal. Like, it is very hard to come up with super like original characters. Again, you are not a master. You aren't like Wes Anderson. You're not gonna, or whoever, like you're not gonna make up whole new characters that have never existed. But I can blend three together pretty easily.
Wes Anderson doesn't even make new characters for his movies.
He's the only director I can
Again, love him. He's one of my favorite directors and creators of all time. But literally has been making more or less the same movie for 25 years.
With the same actors, too.
And I'm going to watch that shit every time.
Every time.
Yeah.
Sign me up.
Quentin Tarantino was actually the person I was trying to think of, but just the first director that came to my mind. But still, like whatever. You're not going to be the guy. Like maybe you'll get a little bit that's like the one thing that's new and fresh. But like I just blend people. We talked about with Zeisel, like he's based on these three things.
And that makes it easier in a lot of senses,
and now
because you have.
But instead of it makes it easier. Like I had in my head a concept, like I want to do something like this, and then it just kind of went from there. I don't a lot of times go in like, okay, he needs a personality. Who am I going to mimic? He needs a drive. Like you just find what works and stuff, and a lot of it's just by existing. Like again, we were watching Marvelous Miss Maisel, and like one of the comedians on there, I was like, I really like this guy. I think he'd be fun to play. But I'm not good enough to do that. So what I come up with is the two rungs down, and it's different enough because it's not as good.
But I think that exercise, what about that character do I like, and do I want to actually pull from into my character?
Yeah.
Then you're taking these little micro snippets from them, borrowing their DNA and injecting it into your character to make something new.
And it is like you were saying, like the more you do it, you can probably get pretty precise. Like one of like my previous characters, the pirate captain, I want him to be basically Han Solo plus the Indigo Montoya from Princess Bride plus Tywin Lannister. Like
I think you nailed that.
And it was like it's a tough blend because they're characters that are like two of them are relatively similar. But that you come up with something new. But I didn't go in and say, like, I need his wit and his ruthlessness or tactic. So like that's what I wanted. Those are the things I wanted. I just wasn't good enough then to pinpoint specifically.
Well, and here's the thing with that character, since I was DMing when you were playing him, I would not have been able to say, oh, this is a blend of these three characters. But what I can say is that he was a very unique, compelling, and real character that made game choices and storytelling choices that were powerful and impactful to the game, and like really put the other players, like made them feel stuff. And I think when you're playing a character to that level, that's like the crux of role playing, when you can use those characters' traits and personalities, and it's really driving the behavior and actions of them. That was just a fun experience.
I think that is the first character I made that, like, it was the character making choices and not what I would do. That I graduated to a different level with that person. And because I had made 20 before that weren't up to that, that are like, this is just me, or this is the opposite of me, or this is just Dritz, or whatever you do when you're making your first stuff.
Which actually, that's a really good tip. If you feel like it's too much to borrow or be inspired by something, or like you can't break out of being too referential, take something and make a foil of it. Like, even if you want to make a hero and you have to go and find your favorite villain and then and use that to think of a hero that would be good at fighting that villain.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, don't recreate Batman, but like, what if the Joker was fighting, your favorite hero that you're inspired by from some other genre or media or whatever?
That's a cool idea.
That could be a cool way to like hack it. You don't have to think of everything originally. You just have to start thinking of some opposites and then pick stuff that will work with your style or whatever.
Yeah. So we've talked about a few different ways to find inspiration, ways to pull it in a way that makes sense and doesn't feel like icky or dirty. Is there any other concepts or tactics or things we want to shots we want to call for this sort of topic, borrowing stuff?
So at the beginning of this conversation, you sent the Reddit thread that maybe gave us a little structure or inspired this conversation. And I haven't read it, but
it's actually not a very long thread, and there's one main point.
But there's a big capital bold thing that says steal the concept, not the details, and I disagree. Steal both.
There's several things I disagree with, but yeah.
Do you want to dissect this real quick and before we wrap up?
Yeah,
just like,
sure.
What do we agree and not agree with?
Yeah.
Because I agree with you that I don't agree with all of these.
Yeah.
Let's read it first.
So yeah, I read it earlier when you guys were talking about movies I'd never seen. The problem is they picked one of the things I have seen, which is Star Wars, to use as their example. I think this is really good advice. We should like post this so people can link to it and stuff, obviously. But basically, this person lays out, Star Wars as kind of an example of what happens when you start to borrow things. Which they also point out that Star Wars is borrowing heavily from Flash Gordon, which I haven't seen, but I've heard that a lot from, people who were around when Star Wars came out, like our parents' age and stuff.
That's just a rip-off of Flash Gordon.
Yeah, so like reskinning, is like the thing that they talk about a bit, which I agree with. Like, you can take details and change them and move them around. It's just one of those posts that's too black and white.
Yeah,
I think.
Well, I think what they're saying with like, don't steal the details, like a kid named Luke Skywalker who's going to go up against, a dark empire, too detailed. But you can take the overall spirit of that. Farm kid from a backwater planet gets roped into a rebellion alliance to defeat, an overarching empire. You can water that down and change that a little easier than the micro details of a space opera.
Yeah.
I think that's
when
kind
he
of the
says like
nature of
if you
that.
steal from Star Wars, everyone will know because it's so popular and wide reaching. Which again, like I said before, might not even be a bad thing in a context of being inspired and knowing that people are going to be into your idea. That is good in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like this article is just basically saying change the nouns.
Yeah, so that's
more or less, which is totally legit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess like if you're borrowing from other mediums to such an accuracy where it is identifiable, you're doing it wrong. And your intention was to not.
Yeah.
But taking these themes, go ahead. Yeah.
No, I'm sorry.
No, if you had a thought, jump in.
No, I was just gonna say that I think it's just like the wording, you know what I mean? Like stealing what is a concept to you and what is a detail. Because
Yeah.
like if you're just changing the descriptions of things, if that's what you mean by detail, then I guess I am on, a different page than if you're like, because there's just those, the idea of the 7 or whatever stories that exist, and it's so hard to get outside of any of those. I don't think there's anything wrong with using those concepts.
Yeah.
And driving them into the ground because we always have and we always will.
Yeah.
So it's like only those little details are what differentiates every story. I don't entirely buy into that.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, I do get the overarching idea, which I think is kind of.
Yeah, like the concept is the high level, the details are the like what. So, yeah, I think it's just a blend.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I would say definitely steal concepts and definitely steal details, not proper nouns though.
Yeah. I guess what I'm thinking is steal both when it feels good and you can riff off of it, especially. Just don't steal the same concept with the same details and keep them together.
Okay, there's the crux.
There's the crux. Because then it's,
Yeah,
then
your hero isn't a black-clad knight with a flaming red sword. That's Darth Vader. But if your hero is your villain is a black-clad knight, and he doesn't have that sword, it's not going to be straight up Star Wars.
Yeah, it's not as.
But somebody else could still have the lightsaber-y style sword.
Yeah, Black Knights are pretty prevalent in medieval fantasy. That's fine.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
which is why there is one on Star Wars.
That is true.
Because it came from. He didn't make that shit up, guys.
No, he didn't make it up. I mean, yeah, he stole like shot for shot from old World War II footage.
Yep.
Like a lot of the
freaking outfits,
dog fights and stuff are from like World War II serials or whatever.
And the lightsaber fights, the early lightsaber fights.
Nazis.
They're space Nazis.
Yeah, like, just rebranded.
Yeah, he stole a lot from Japanese like samurai culture, samurai films.
Kurosawa,
Flash Gordon, like I think that this is actually a perfect example of what like you can steal details, you can steal concepts.
Yeah, you steal shots. That is a detail.
Yeah. I mean, and he did it well enough that it's one of those things that people are like, "Oh, that's brilliant! I didn't know that. That's really cool."
I didn't know until somebody called it out to me.
Yeah, I didn't. Yeah, I mean, what like we wouldn't. We weren't
when I saw Star Wars.
Yeah,
I'd never even heard of Kurosawa and all the other Japanese World War II films. But you you changed the fighter to a spaceship and the Atlantic Ocean to space or Pacific Ocean into space. You're not going to be able to easily tell. Like I've seen that before.
Actually, as big a fan as I am, it never occurred to me that the scale of it was inspired by oceans. Like that makes so much sense to me that you just said that. And I know they're ships and they have a navy. They call it the Imperial fucking Navy. But I've never 100% just been like, oh yeah, these could just be on water.
Yeah,
going to be the same.
They also all go like in a row. They're not like stratused. Or like facing weird.
And they always sink.
They sink in the same way.
They always sink. They're in space. Wouldn't they just? I don't know.
Yeah.
But they always literally like list down, even if there's no like planet with gravity by it.
Yeah, there was one I think in like in Rebels or something where they like they shot one and it like sunk down and crashed into another, and I'm like, this would never happen. Like only once has that like suspension of disbelief not paid off for me.
Yeah.
Like, why would it's in space? But again, that's a perfect example. He stole concepts, details, the hero's journey. Like almost nothing about Star Wars is original, but it's stolen from so many different things and it's reskinned that it feels totally groundbreaking.
I do wonder where lightsabers were inspired from.
Maybe he invented lightsabers.
Because that's like a cool like cinematic effect too.
Oh
like,
yeah.
Oh, he's got a light sword, but now back in this time frame, like this has never been done before. We have to.
Well, the thing is, especially in movies, because like that, I've seen it happen. Like you could be plugging in a fluorescent. I got one right here. These fluorescent tubes, having Star Wars not ever existed, holding it in your hand. And like every kid who ever picks up a stick just being like, oh man, this is like a light sword.
Yeah.
And like, because the other thing is like, you don't have to steal from IP. You don't have to steal from a YouTube video of a breakdown of, how the story was told. Like you're a human being and you're pulling every experience that's ever crossed your senses. So like, you can be inspired by some interaction in the grocery store that you saw, and no one's ever going to be like, oh, this is stealing from real life. How lame.
Yeah.
So just again, I guess, be like nice to yourself. Like don't beat yourself up about having to create the only original example that your players are ever going to see of this particular happenstance.
Yeah. I think
too much pressure.
That's a really good point, Mark, because there's a quote that I'm going to butcher, but I think about all the time. I think it was like Muhammad Ali or whatever. It says like, you're seeing my like 1 hour when I've put in 10,000 hours of work.
Yeah.
Like everybody thinks like, oh, you're the best in the world. How do you like, yeah, cause I worked on it. Like the lightsaber will say, or whatever, like you're seeing the finished product, but it very easily could be like, oh yeah, I thought of this cause I picked up a tube or a flashlight. Like, and it was like, oh, awesome. But that feels like I just stole it from real life. But like, how do you think ideas happen?
Yeah.
Like, how do you like, so we're comparing it to like, he must have just like divinely, the muse came down and said, here's a lightsaber, but it was
muse. I hate that.
It's always a culmination of your experience.
Yes. And being a mindful observer of the world.
There is no divine intervention. If you have like a strike of an epiphany, it is still all of your neurons just lining up with all of your previous. You held a flashlight and pretended it was a lightsaber.
A friend
because we know what lightsabers are, but Lucas probably did the same shit as a kid.
Yeah, like in a foggy night.
Who hasn't?
Yeah, you know what I mean? And like a friend of mine named Blake,
shout out to Blake.
He wrote a book once in the of his poetry and stuff, but one of them that I always thought was cool is like We Never Wait for Lightning, which is basically like, it was the title basically being like, if you sit around waiting for the inspiration or some muse to come kiss you on the cheek, like muses existed because back in the day artists had to trick their patrons into feeding them because there was no legitimate way to make art as an individual. Like
the muse
straight up some Renaissance, like, someone needed this system. Maybe like, oh no, the muse is a very special thing that only lives in me. So don't pay that dude to paint your Sistine Chapel or make you your garden. You got to have me, and I need a room. I'm going to stay out in your shed. 3 square meals, please.
Yeah,
like
3 hots and a cot.
I hate when people get stuck on that because I was for so long.
And it's
just like, oh, I'm never going to do anything fun or exciting creatively because this special thing hasn't happened. I haven't found my midichlorians yet.
Yeah, you don't. And it's tough because we are like, so much of our culture and stories are built on like the idea of a special. Like Luke Skywalker is a special. Oh, you're born with the Force. You're special because your dad was special. Harry Potter was born a wizard and you don't got to do shit to work for it. Like you're just born special. And we feel like, fuck, I'm not born special. So like, what can I do? But like, you didn't see the 4, 5, 6, 10 drafts that they wrote before and like did the hard work, that the 10 drafts of Harry Potter that sucked.
Yeah.
And then you get the good one.
Well, and if you look at the characters themselves too, when you look like special characters, like Luke sucked, Harry sucked when they first started. That's
they just go on a
hero's journey to prepare and build themselves.
They do work for it. It does the idea. I call it the special. The idea of like somebody who's just like destined to be because they have like the right blood.
Yeah.
The chosen one. That as a trope does kind of drive me nuts because I do want to see more stories of like normal people working hard and that paying off.
Yeah.
But maybe that's just not compelling.
Yeah, that's which is one of the reasons I like Rogue One.
The
most as a movie out of all of the Star Wars ones, because it's a bunch of normal people and that shit don't end well.
Yeah.
But they still complete their mission and stuff.
Again,
and
another example of a movie that ends on a very difficult note, but like has very high emotional weight.
But also back to our conversation, another example of like that is just a World War II spy movie.
Yep.
Yeah.
Hands down it is. Beat by beat. You
Yes.
can feel it. And
You
it's
can
good.
feel it.
And it's okay.
And that is why I liked it.
Yes. Because it's like, that's where I think Star Wars typically excels, is where you have like cool space fantasy setting, but what if it's samurai, cub and wolf situation?
Yeah.
Or Western or spy movie.
Yeah.
It works.
That's what I want. And again, like, so the sequel trilogy basically just ripped off the original trilogy. Like, just rip off spy movies or fucking World War II. Like, you got other stuff you can rip off.
You don't need to rip off yourself anymore.
Because then it is like you don't even change the set dressings. It's way too obvious.
If you're gonna steal, do high effort stealing.
Yeah.
Yes. I think that might be the thesis of the.
I agree. That's it for this week's episode. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast if you haven't already, and head over to +1togaming.com for more live discussions, actual plays, character creation tips, and more. You can also join us live every Sunday on Twitch at twitch.tv/+1togaming. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll catch you next time.